Posted by Darius_McCorkindale on forum creepypasta.org. This story was first published by Darius_McCorkindale on creepypasta.org. I'd lived my whole life in the small, idyllic farming town of Harvest Hill, where the annual pumpkin festival is more than just an event. It's a cherished tradition that brings the entire community together. Every fall, the townsfolk gather in the town square, surrounded by the glowing red and yellow of autumn leaves, to celebrate the season's bounty and compete for the coveted title of the largest pumpkin. For years, I had dreamed of winning that prize, but this year my hopes were higher than ever. Nestled at the edge of town, my modest farmhouse is surrounded by meticulously tended gardens. Each morning, I wake at dawn, don my gardening gloves, and tend to my plants with the care and precision of a master craftsman. This year, my pride and joy was a massive pumpkin that I've nurtured from a tiny seedling into a colossal gourd. It sat in the center of my garden, its vibrant orange skin gleaming in the sunlight, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride every time I looked at it. However, there was one garden in Harvest Hill that always caught my eye with a mix of curiosity and unease: Old Farmer Joe's. His property, just next door to mine, was shrouded in mystery. The garden was overgrown and wild, yet his pumpkins always seemed to grow bigger and healthier than anyone else's. Joe was a reclusive, eccentric man who rarely spoke to anyone, and when he did, his words were often cryptic and unsettling. The townspeople often gossiped that he held secrets, old and dark, but of course this was all wild speculation and no one knew anything for sure. As the days grew shorter and the festival drew near, I found myself working tirelessly in my garden, determined to finally outdo Joe and claim the grand prize. The townsfolk noticed my dedication and would often stop by to admire my giant pumpkin, offering words of encouragement and praise. The excitement was tangible, and for the first time, I felt that victory was within my grasp. The day of the festival arrived with a crisp chill in the air. We were in the midst of autumn, and the town square was alive with activity, filled with stalls selling homemade pies, caramel apples, and other seasonal treats. Children ran around in costumes, laughing and playing, while adults admired the various pumpkins on display. My pumpkin, transported with great care, sat proudly among the contenders, drawing gasps of admiration from the crowd. As the judges made their rounds, carefully inspecting each entry, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. When they finally approached my pumpkin, their eyes widened in surprise, and I saw them exchange impressed glances. After what felt like an eternity, they announced the winner. My pumpkin had claimed the top prize. The crowd erupted in applause as I stepped forward to accept the trophy. My fellow townsfolk clapped me on the back and congratulated me, their faces beaming with genuine happiness. Amid the celebration, Old Farmer Joe approached me. His weathered face broke into a rare smile as he shook my hand, his grip firm and uncomfortably tight. "Congratulations," he said, his voice gravelly and low. "You've done well this year. But remember, there's always a secret to true growth." His strange words lingered in my mind long after the festivities had ended and the crowd had dispersed. As I stood alone in my garden that evening, gazing at the enormous pumpkin that had brought me such joy, a strange sense of unease began to creep in. What did Joe mean by a secret to true growth? And why did his smile seem more like a warning than a congratulation? Little did I know, the answer to those questions would soon turn the essence of my existence upside down, revealing a dark secret that lay hidden beneath the fertile soil of Harvest Hill. ******. My first night after the festival I experienced fitful sleep and unsettling dreams. I kept waking up to the image of Old Farmer Joe's cryptic smile and the ominous tone in his voice. By the first light of morning, all the elation I'd felt in victory had faded, replaced by a gnawing curiosity about old Joe's parting words. I was determined to get to the bottom of it, so I decided to pay Joe a visit. Under the guise of thanking him for his congratulations, I approached his property, feeling apprehensive, yet determined to find out what he meant. His garden, as always, was an overgrown mess of vines and leaves, with enormous pumpkins peeking out from the undergrowth. The sheer size of his produce, even larger than mine, seemed almost unnatural. I found Joe in the back, hunched over a patch of particularly large pumpkins. He straightened up as I approached, wiping his hands on his worn overalls. "Morning, Joe," I called out, trying my best to sound casual. "I just wanted to thank you for your kind words yesterday." Joe looked up, his eyes sharp and piercing despite his age. "You're welcome," he said slowly, as if measuring each word. "Your pumpkin was truly impressive. What brings you here?" Taking a deep breath, I decided to broach the subject directly. "I couldn't stop thinking about what you said, about the secret to true growth." "What did you mean by that?" For a moment, Joe said nothing. Then, he motioned for me to follow him. We walked through his garden, the dense foliage brushing against us, until we reached an old, decrepit shed. Joe pushed open the door, revealing a cluttered space filled with gardening tools, jars of strange substances, and dusty old books. "Curiosity can be a dangerous thing," he said, rummaging through a pile of papers. "But since you've come this far, you deserve to know." He handed me an ancient, leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. "This," he said, "is a grimoire of sorts. It's been passed down through my family for generations. It contains knowledge that most would deem unnatural." I opened the book, my eyes scanning the strange symbols and diagrams that filled its pages. There were detailed instructions on rituals, strange ingredients, and dark incantations. My heart raced as I realized the implication of what I was seeing. "Is this magic?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Joe nodded. "Not the kind you'd read about in fairy tales, but something much older and darker. It's a form of alchemy, using the natural world to bend nature to your will. My pumpkins thrive because of these rituals, but they come at a cost." "What cost?" I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. Joe's expression grew grave. "The soil here is enriched with more than just nutrients. It requires sacrifices, animal blood, bones, and sometimes other things. The magic demands a balance." I stared at him in disbelief, the weight of his words sinking in. "And my pumpkin? How did it grow so large?" Joe sighed. "I saw your dedication and wanted to help, so I enhanced your soil when you weren't looking. I thought it was harmless, a way to give you a taste of success. But I fear I may have set something in motion." My mind reeled with the implications. My prize-winning pumpkin, the source of my pride and joy, was the result of dark, unnatural forces. The sense of accomplishment I had felt now seemed hollow and tainted. As I left Joe's garden, clutching the grimoire tightly, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had crossed a line. The vibrant orange of my pumpkin now seemed sinister, and the whispers of the town took on a more menacing tone. The once idyllic Harvest Hill was now shrouded in a shadow of ancient secrets and dark magic, and I was at the center of it all. The true horror of my situation was beginning to unfold, and I knew that uncovering the full extent of Joe's secrets would come with a price that I might not be willing to pay. The days following Old Farmer Joe's revelation were filled with dread but also undeniable fascination. I couldn't bring myself to destroy the grimoire he had given me. Instead, I spent hours poring over its ancient pages, trying to understand the arcane rituals and the nature of the dark forces at work. The more I read, the more I realized how deep and dangerous the magic was. As I delved deeper into the grimoire, I noticed strange changes in my garden. Other plants began to grow at an alarming rate, their leaves larger and more vibrant than ever before. The soil, once rich and loamy, took on a darker hue and a peculiar smell. The once comforting sounds of nature were now accompanied by eerie whispers and rustling noises that seemed to emanate from the very ground. Despite my growing unease, I continued to seek Joe's guidance, hoping to find a way to undo what had been done. Our conversations grew increasingly bizarre. Joe spoke in riddles, his eyes often glazing over as if he were communicating with something unseen. He mentioned ancient spirits of the harvest, entities that demanded offerings in exchange for their gifts. "You've tapped into something old and powerful," Joe said one evening as we stood by the garden fence. "The spirits are pleased, but they are never satisfied for long. They will demand more." "What do you mean by more?" I asked, a sense of dread curling in my stomach. Joe's face darkened. "The rituals require balance. You must give back to the earth what you take. The larger the bounty, the greater the sacrifice." That night, I awoke to strange noises outside my window. Peering into the darkness, I saw shadows moving in the garden, shifting and twisting in unnatural ways. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. I grabbed a flashlight and ventured outside, my heart pounding in my chest. As I approached the center of the garden, the light illuminated a horrifying sight. Small animals, rabbits, birds, and even a stray cat, lay dead among the plants, their bodies seemingly drained of life. The vines of the giant pumpkin had grown thicker, their tendrils wrapping around the lifeless creatures as if drawing nourishment from them. The pumpkin, which I'd severed from its roots to take it to the festival, was now reattached to the ground. Panic set in, and I realized that whatever magic had been used was spiraling out of control. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. Desperate for a solution, I visited the town library to research the history of Harvest Hill and its connection to old farmer Joe's family. The librarian, an elderly woman with a wealth of knowledge about the town's past, led me to a dusty archive filled with old newspapers and records. As I sifted through the yellowed pages, I uncovered stories of mysterious disappearances and unexplained phenomena dating back generations. Each incident seemed to coincide with particularly bountiful harvests at Joe's property. One article detailed the sudden disappearance of a young girl during a pumpkin festival many years ago, hinting at foul play but never proving anything. The deeper I dug, the more I realized that Joe's family had long been rumored to practice dark rituals. The townsfolk, though wary, had always turned a blind eye due to the prosperity the harvests brought. Back at home, I began to experience vivid nightmares. I dreamt of being buried alive, of roots and vines slowly constricting around my body, pulling me deeper into the earth. Each morning, I awoke drenched in sweat, the images lingering in my mind. Sarah, my wife, noticed the change in me. "You've been acting strange," she said one morning, her eyes filled with concern. "What's going on?" I couldn't bring myself to tell her the full truth. "Just stress from the festival," I lied, trying to sound convincing. "I'll be fine." But Sarah wasn't the only one who noticed. Neighbors began to comment on the unusual growth in my garden, their curiosity tinged with suspicion. I could see the unease in their eyes, the way they whispered when they thought I wasn't listening. Determined to find a way to reverse the dark magic, I began documenting everything. I took photos of the garden, recorded the strange noises, and even collected samples of the soil. My collection of evidence grew, but so did my paranoia. I felt like I was being watched, not just by Joe, but by something else, something ancient and malevolent. One night, while reviewing the footage from my garden camera, I saw a shadowy figure lurking near the pumpkin patch. It wasn't Joe. The figure was tall and lean, dressed in dark clothing, and moved with a stealthy purpose. My blood ran cold as I realized the figure was performing a ritual, chanting words I couldn't understand. The next morning, I found the pumpkin even larger, its vines more aggressive. In a moment of clarity, I confronted Joe one last time. "I've seen the rituals. I know what you've done," I said, my voice trembling with anger and fear. "Tell me how to stop it." Joe sighed, his shoulders slumping as if carrying the weight of centuries. "You can't stop it," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The spirits are already here. The only way to appease them is with a greater sacrifice." "What kind of sacrifice?" I demanded, my mind racing through the possibilities. Joe looked at me with a mix of pity and resignation. "You know what kind," he said. "Blood for growth. Life for life." As his words sank in, I realized the true horror of my situation. The price of my success was far greater than I could have ever imagined, and the darkness I had unleashed was now beyond my control. ******, the situation reached a horrifying turning point on a cold, moonless night. The ghostly quiet of the garden was shattered by an unsettling noise, a low hum that seemed to resonate from the very earth itself. Unable to sleep, I decided to investigate, clutching the grimoire tightly and armed with a flashlight. As I stepped into the garden, the hum grew louder, vibrating through the ground and into my bones. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the twisted vines of my giant pumpkin, which now seemed almost sentient, writhing and pulsing as if alive. My heart pounded as I moved closer, the sense of impending doom thick in the air. Suddenly, I saw it, an area of disturbed soil near the pumpkin, freshly turned and dark with moisture. Kneeling down, I used my hands to brush away the loose dirt, uncovering something that made my blood run cold. Beneath the soil were the remains of small animals, their bodies contorted in unnatural ways. Among them, a human hand protruded, the flesh pale and lifeless. A wave of nausea swept over me as I realized the full extent of the horror. This was no longer just about a giant pumpkin or an eccentric neighbor. The garden had become a graveyard, and the dark magic I had unknowingly nurtured now demanded human lives as its true price. Desperate for answers, I turned to the grimoire, flipping through the pages with shaking hands. The ancient text described a ritual of appeasement, a way to communicate with the spirits of the harvest. The instructions were clear but chilling. A sacrifice was needed to stop the dark forces, one that matched the scale of the magic used. Fueled by feelings of both fear and purpose, I stormed over to Joe's house, the grimoire clutched in my hand. He met me at the door, his expression one of grim understanding. "I found the bodies, Joe," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and horror. "How do I stop this?" Joe sighed, his face etched with lines of regret and sorrow. "I warned you about the cost," he said softly. "The spirits demand balance. The greater the gift, the greater the sacrifice. Tell me how to end it," I demanded, desperation creeping into my voice. Joe led me to his cluttered shed once more. From a hidden compartment, he retrieved a small, intricately carved wooden box. Opening it, he revealed a ceremonial dagger and a piece of parchment covered in ancient runes. "This is the ritual of severance," he explained. "It's the only way to break the bond with the spirits. But it requires a life for a life." My heart sank as I realized the implications. The life of someone I loved would have to be sacrificed to undo the dark magic that had taken hold of my garden. The weight of this knowledge bore down on me like a crushing force. Returning home, I found Sarah waiting for me, her eyes filled with concern. "What's going on?" she asked. "You've been so distant, and the garden. It feels wrong." Torn between the need to protect her and the truth of what I had discovered, I decided to tell her everything. As I recounted the dark history of old Farmer Joe's magic and the horrific revelation in the garden, Sarah's face paled. "We need to leave," she said urgently. "We can't stay here. It's too dangerous." But I knew running wouldn't solve the problem. The spirits were bound to the land, and they wouldn't let us escape so easily. The only way to free ourselves was to complete the ritual, but I couldn't bring myself to suggest the unthinkable. In the days that followed, the garden's transformation accelerated. The giant pumpkin grew even larger, its vines spreading like a cancer across the property, suffocating everything in their path. The eerie hum became a constant presence, a sinister reminder of the dark forces at play. As the situation grew more dire, I spent hours each day in the library, seeking any alternative to the ritual of severance. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, casting long shadows across the town, I stumbled upon an old, forgotten diary tucked away in the archives. The diary belonged to a woman named Margaret, who had lived in Harvest Hill over a century ago. Her entries detailed her own encounters with the dark magic and the spirits of the harvest. In her final entry, she wrote of a similar situation, describing the unbearable choice she had to make to protect her family. "My husband's life was the price I paid," Margaret wrote. "But the spirits are never truly satisfied. They always return, hungry for more. The cycle must be broken, or it will continue forever." With a sinking heart, I realized the full horror of what Joe had been trying to tell me. The ritual of severance might only be a temporary solution. The spirit's hunger could not be sated for long, and the dark magic would eventually return, demanding new sacrifices. Standing in my garden that night, surrounded by the monstrous vines and the eerie hum, I felt the weight of an impossible decision. The midpoint of my journey had revealed the true nature of the darkness I faced, and the path ahead was fraught with danger and sacrifice. In the distance, old Farmer Joe's house stood in shadow, a silent witness to the legacy of the dark magic. As I stared at the giant pumpkin, its surface pulsating with a malevolent life, I knew that the hardest part of my ordeal was yet to come. The night of the final confrontation arrived, shrouded in an unnatural darkness that seemed to swallow all light. The air was heavy with the scent of decaying leaves and the pervasive hum of the